This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsa Hone, and it's Friday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. This time around, I'm looking at what Wizards internally calls Saboteur effects. This isn't a keyword that actually appears in any Magic cards, but when designing cards, Wizards uses Saboteur to refer to any effect that triggers when a creature does combat damage to a player. Flavor-wise, the idea is that when these creatures get behind enemy lines, it can really mess stuff up. These effects appear in every color, but they are the most common in blue and black. To be eligible for this list, a card had to have some ability that triggers when a creature does combat damage to a player. This includes creatures that have an ability like that, and cards that make creature tokens with a Saboteur ability, or cards that grant creatures a Saboteur ability. In all, there were 342 cards eligible for this list, and in this video, I'll talk about the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A Pro Tour, Players Tour, Mythic Championship, or Mythic Invitational top 8, as well as Legacy or Vintage Championship top 8s are worth 2 points, and a Grand Prix or Magic Fest top 8 is worth 1 point. Alright, let's get to the list. At number 10, it's a Planeswalker, Vraska the Unseen, a Planeswalker who makes creature tokens with a crazy powerful Saboteur trigger. If one of the tokens she makes with her ultimate hits an opponent, they lose the game on the spot. And sure, those tokens are little 1/1s with no evasion to speak of, but they are also 1/1s that can easily win the game. In addition to that ultimate, Vraska can also use a +1 that can protect her or at least cause a lot of problems for your opponent. This is because she makes it so that any creature that damages her will die, so sure, maybe your opponent can take her down right away, but at best they'll be trading 1 for 1 and frequently more than that. After all, she starts at 5 loyalty and using the +1 means she'll be at 6. Her -3 is also quite strong because it lets you destroy a non-land permanent. Generally, if a Planeswalker can protect themselves and work as removal, they see some play, and that's definitely true of Vraska, who of course also has a powerful ultimate she can reach in just a couple of turns. All of Vraska's points came in Standard, where she prominently featured in Jund decks. At number 9, it is Shadow Mage Infiltrator. Back in the day, Magic held an invitational every year where the top players were, well, invited and played in a tournament. As part of the prize, whoever won got to help Wizards design a card that would feature their likeness. Shadow Mage Infiltrator is one of these invitational cards designed with the likeness of John Finkel. I also have a whole top 10 about the invitational cards if you're interested in hearing more about them. Anywho, Finkel's idea of putting a Saboteur effect on a creature with evasion is a nice one. Sure, Fear doesn't give a creature evasion all of the time, but it does it often enough. The Infiltrator's combat damage trigger comes with 3 of the most powerful words in Magic too: draw a card. If this is left unchecked, it will allow a player to draw way too many cards, and their opponent will never be able to recover. The Infiltrator had a couple of runs through both block and Standard since it was printed as a time-shifted card in Time Spiral. It took advantage as it was played in Control decks in both formats both of the times it was printed. It also has 1 Pro Tour top 8 from an extended Reanimator deck. At number 8, it is Hypnotic Spectre, one of the first cards to ever have a Saboteur effect since it has been around as long as the game of Magic has. It was a very important card in the early days of Magic because it was a very efficient flyer that could greatly disrupt the opponent's game plan thanks to the random discard effect. Plus, you could combine it with Dark Ritual to play the Spectre on turn 1, something that will quickly lose you the game if you don't have a quick answer for it. Both times it was legal in Standard, it saw significant play. Its first time through Standard, it saw play in black, aggro, and control decks. The second time, it was played in both aggro and mid-range decks. It also gained a couple of points in Legacy mono black aggro. It doesn't have any points since 2007, and it's an interesting card to think about in today's Magic. I mentioned this a few weeks ago in another top 10, but I think it's an interesting card to think about because if it was reprinted, I'm not sure it would actually see play. These days, a card has to do something upon entering the battlefield to be worth it, and a 2/2 for 3 mana that needs to attack to actually have a permanent effect just doesn't cut it anymore. At number 7, it is Dragon Lord Ojitai, a dragon with a great Saboteur trigger that gives you great card selection and draws you a card. It is basically a much larger Shadow Mage Infiltrator with a more powerful trigger. The fact Ojitai is hexproof as long as it remains untapped is important too, as it makes it very difficult to deal with before it draws its controller at least one card. It also means that in a pinch, Ojitai can really be a great blocker while you try to recover from an aggro opponent's early start. Ojitai is a great card for control decks since it can represent a 4-turn clock for your opponent, while also allowing you to draw into more cards that can help you protect Ojitai or to get your opponent's creatures out of the way. Ojitai was mostly played in various control decks in Standard, including those with the Dragon sub-theme, as well as more traditional Esper and Jeskai control decks. Ojitai also has a single point from a modern blue-white control deck. At number 6, it is Bident of Thousa, a legendary enchantment artifact that lets you draw a card off of every one of your creatures that does combat damage to an opponent. That's the kind of thing that snowballs like crazy, because as you draw extra cards, you'll draw more creatures who can then draw you more cards. It also has an activated ability that combines well with the static ability, since it forces opposing creatures to attack you, opening up your opponent to take several hits while you draw several cards. This can be especially powerful against control opponents because they can't usually handle the opposing player drawing as many cards as they do. The Bident was pretty much only played in one deck while it was in Standard, Devotion to Blue, which was basically a mono-blue aggro deck with lots of cheap evasive creatures, which is exactly what you want to be pairing with Bident of Thousa. At number 5, it is Grim Flair, a creature whose Saboteur ability gives you card selection and lets you load up your graveyard. He's another Saboteur creature that has an evasive ability, but trample on a 2-2 isn't exactly scary. However, thanks to Delirium, he usually won't be a 2-2 for long, and he can actually help you get Delirium if he manages to hit your opponent. He can often amount to being a 2-mana 4-4 with trample and a powerful card selection ability. Delirium decks were big in Standard while he was there, and he helped him be one of the best decks in the format. He's also been played some in modern aggro decks that make heavy use of the graveyard like Death's Shadow. He doesn't have any points since 2018 though. At number 4, we have our second Vraska, Vraska Golgari Queen. Similar to Vraska the Unseen, this Vraska has an ultimate that involves a Saboteur ability that causes your opponent to lose. Instead of making individual tokens that do it though, she gives you an emblem that does it, which means that if any one of your creatures does combat damage to your opponent, they immediately lose the game, and that's pretty sweet. In addition to that, she has a +2 that lets you cash in permanents for life and cards, and a -3 that lets you destroy a low converted mana cost non-land permanent. Reaching her ultimate is a little challenging, but it isn't impossible in a deck that can minimize the downside of sacrificing a permanent while drawing more creatures who can protect her, who can potentially represent the immediately lethal damage that she can do with her ultimate. Vraska has been played a lot in Standard. At first, this was in Golgari aggro and mid-range decks, as well as Sultai Control. Then, in late 2019, the Sacrifice deck really emerged on the scene, and Vraska really took off after that. Those decks are loaded up with Sacrifice payoffs and plenty of Sacrifice fodder, making her +2 really scary. Having Mayhem Devil and Korvald in play when you use her +2 ability is very, very good. Vraska has also been played in Sacrifice decks in Historic and in Modern Jund. At number 3, I have 3 cards. All of them are part of a mega cycle of equipment. A mega cycle is one that occurs across a whole bunch of different sets, as opposed to most cycles, where the cards all appear in one set or block. All of the swords in this cycle are 3-mana artifacts with an equip cost of 2. Each of them grants +2/+2, protection from 2 colors, and 2 color-appropriate Saboteur triggers. There are, of course, more than just these 3 who have points, but these are the 3 that had high enough scores to make it on this list. Sword of Feast and Famine is a legitimate number 3, War and Peace would have been number 7, and Fire and Ice would have been number 8. Sword of Feast and Famine grants black and green protection, and its Saboteur trigger forces your opponent to discard a card and then untaps all of your lands. Disrupting your opponent and getting to cast extra spells is pretty insane, and that's what makes it the best of these swords. Sword of War and Peace grants protection from red and white, and when the equipped creature does combat damage, it does additional damage to them equal to the cards in their hand, while gaining you life for the number of cards in your hand. That type of effect isn't quite lifelink, but it does have a similar effect on the game. The last of these is Sword of Fire and Ice, which is actually one of the original 2 swords from this mega cycle, printed way back in Darksteel. It grants protection from red and blue, and its Saboteur trigger lets you shock something and draws you a card. All of these were pretty heavily played in their Standard formats, but they have success in other formats too, like Modern and Legacy, and a big reason for that is Stoneforge Mystic. Just running a singleton copy of a sword becomes a great idea once you have a Mystic, and as you can see, these swords make pretty much any creature a huge problem. At number 2, it is Long Tusk Cub. The Cub starts out as a 2-mana 2-2, but can quickly get out of hand thanks to a Saboteur ability that produces energy, which the Cub can cash in for +1/+1 counters. Energy was a famously overpowered mechanic, and that was something that really helped propel the Cub to many points in Standard. It was not unusual for those decks to have enough energy to pump into the Cub right away, instead of having to wait for the damage trigger to give them energy. The Cub was played in the more aggressive energy decks of the format, where virtually every card in the deck produced energy or could use energy, like the Cub. It even continued to see play after some of the key cards from the deck got banned. The Cub hasn't been played at all since rotating out of Standard, but a reprint in Kaladesh Remastered might mean it has a chance in Historic. And at number 1, I have Nightvale Spectre, which is actually the second Spectre to make the list. It's probably not too surprising to see Spectres on this list because they're a creature type that regularly has a Saboteur effect, and most of them, like Hypnotic Spectre, involve making your opponent discard. Nightvale Spectre doesn't do that though. It does something that is potentially even more powerful. It lets you exile the top card of your opponent's library, and then you can play whatever card it exiles. Now, unlike a lot of versions of this effect, you don't get to spend mana of any color to play those cards, but you will hit something you can play or a land often enough that it's still super powerful. It comes with an evasive and relatively efficient body, and it costs hybrid mana, making it something that can be cast in a wider variety of decks. And actually, that mana cost in particular led to it being played a lot more than you might think. While it was in Standard, Devotion decks were a big deal, especially blue and black Devotion decks that had access to powerful payoffs like Grey Merchant of Asphodel and Master of Waves. It provided 3 Devotion for both of those decks, in addition to just being a powerful card all on its own. Well, those are the cards with Saboteur effects that have left the biggest mark on competitive Magic. If you enjoyed this video, do me a favor and like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you stay aware of a new MTG Top 10 as they come along, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. And if you want to catch up on the 310 plus MTG Top 10s I've already done, you should see the playlist on your screen now. Thanks for watching.